Good morning and welcome back to Track 2, the Legislative and Medical Advocacy. We hope you are enjoying your morning break sponsored by EMD Serrano and are ready to dive right into our first breakout session. My name is Christian Jacobs and I'll be your host for these morning sessions. Once again, we'd like to remind everyone that we are live streaming, and I would like to welcome our remote attendees to the session. As a reminder, we have our mobile app available, so be sure to download it and use some of our highlighted features like the live Q&A, which we'll be holding the questions to the end, but you can go ahead and either jot them down on your pads of paper or put them into the mobile app, and we'll address those once we get closer to the end. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first session of the day, Building and Sustaining a Rare Disease Nonprofit, the Importance of Developing a Strategic Plan, presented by John Hockman, Principal at McKinley Advisors. Please join me in welcoming John.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Christian. Good morning or afternoon, wherever you may be, if you are in a remote location. So we're going to talk a little strategic planning. And one of the things that I would like to know from you is, what have your experiences been with strategic planning before? Good, bad, don't even know? Let's just get a little feedback here. Yes, sir. And I'm going to come to you so that people remotely can hear.
We've done very little
Great.
Planning, and I think trying to, at least that I've been involved with, and I think having a framework that we can take to our foundation would be extremely beneficial to help us sustain our growth and obtain our goals going forward.
Great. Okay, so just getting started. Let me just do a logistics thing. Because we're live streaming, they've made it very clear to me we all need to speak into microphones so our colleagues at a distance can hear as well. So I didn't say that earlier, and I should have. My apologies. So the question was, can I say what I mean by strategic planning? And yes, I will walk through that and explain just what I'm talking about when I raise that, which is a data point in and of itself. It's just not familiar for you or not sure what I'm talking about, because different people do use that language, strategic planning, somewhat differently. Others, what have your experiences been with strategic planning? Yes, over here, and let's just get the microphone for you.
Well, with strategic planning, I've worked at 2 different organizations, so I've seen it happen with 2 different models. One organization that I was with, I saw that it was helpful in terms of goal planning, really understanding where we want our mission to move forward, or ensuring that our individuals are indeed pushing mission forward and not, maybe working with silos, not really working in conjunction the way that they should be. However, even though we came up with goals, we weren't really setting those plans in terms of how do we accomplish that. Yes, we had our plans. It was strategic in terms of, okay, well, this is what we want, but we didn't really have a plan of how to get there. When I did work with another organization, we were more fortunate in the sense that it helped to lay the framework of, okay, this is how we're going to get there, and it at least provides you a roadmap of where you need to go. So I've had experiences where it wasn't so good, and experiences where it was really integral in pushing mission forward. So.
Great. And you'll hear me use the word roadmap several times today, because that's, I think, a good metaphor for what a healthy planning process can be. Any other comments on strategic planning, good or bad? Yes, in the back row, right? Christian, right beside you.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
Well, in my professional career, strategic planning is something that I do on a daily basis. It's really just transferring to our foundation. Our foundation is comprised of mostly parents, obviously, with special kiddos. And it's balancing time, putting a plan together, just trying to figure everything out and just executing too. We get sidetracked a lot, to be honest with you. We're a smaller foundation, kind of in its infancy stage. Like most of these diseases, we're pretty ultra rare. We have like 80 kids worldwide with the disease. So it's really just trying to figure out how to maximize and be successful in building the awareness, and that's currently our struggle, like I said, because it's really just volunteer time by mostly parents with the special kiddos and figuring it out. I'm trying my best to move it from more of the private to the nonprofit side, and I think we're struggling a little bit just because of time constraints and and things like that.
Yeah. One of the things thank you. One of the things you will hear me say a couple times today is that strategic planning is an exercise that happens in lots of kinds of organizations, including the for-profit world, the business world. It takes on some slightly different dimensions when you're talking about cause-related organizations, which is the kinds of entities that most of you are representing. And so we need to talk about how that sort of emotion and passion and the cause-driven nature show up in strategic planning and the sort of unique aspects that puts on the process. So we'll talk more about that. So thank you for some initial thoughts on what strategic planning has been like for you. I wanted to get you engaged right away because I don't want to really talk at you the whole time. So let me just give you just a tiny synopsis on me because I'm new to this community. I don't come from the medical community. I'm not affiliated with any of the organizations here. I am a strategic planner by profession. I'm a consultant who works with organizations all over the world to find direction, and I've been doing that for the last 17 years. Before that, I was the CEO of an association for 7 years. So this whole world is my focus, and I work with volunteer leaders and where organizations have professional staff as well to figure out direction and to have critical conversations about where the organization needs to go next. I operate from an office in Washington, D.C., and my firm is McKinley Advisors. We're about 40 people working with organizations nationally and internationally. Did my undergraduate work at The Ohio State University, OH. There we go. We're everywhere. Thank you. That's the Buckeye call. You can find one another anywhere. OHIO. Sorry, it's a little annoying if you're not part of it. But anyway, when I finished my undergraduate work in Ohio, I moved to Washington, D.C., did graduate work at American University, and then started my whole pathway in the not-for-profit world from there. The listens, learns, takes good care is that I opened a bottle of one of those teas, Honest Tea or something, not long ago. And there's oftentimes something on the inside of the bottle cap to get you to think. And it's if you were going to write your bio in 6 words or less, what would it say? And I thought, well, that's kind of a fun challenge. How do you get your essence down to 6 words or less? So my 5 words, I went to Ohio State, I couldn't get to 6. Listens, learns, takes good care. I think that sort of sums up what I hope I bring to the world. That is my husband with our dog at the beach, and I'm a skier and a marathon runner. So if anybody wants to talk about those activities outside of this, happy to do that. I will make note on the slides that I'm going to use today. I'm happy to share them with anybody. So at the end, if you want to bring a card up, I'm happy to make sure that you get a copy of the slides. So you feel free to take pictures or write notes, but also know that you can get access to the slides if you want to. So what are we going to talk about in this session? It's really meant to be an overview, broad session where what is strategic planning, to go to the question from earlier, and what's a good process to walk through, who needs to be involved in the process, and what are some resources or tools to get you started. At the risk of sounding like I'm advertising, let me advertise for a session that's immediately following this, where Amy Bryn Miller, who's the executive director of the Child Neurology Foundation, is going to join me, and we're going to do a workshop to talk about literally the nuts and bolts of doing this. So in more detail, if you want to roll up your sleeves, I've worked a lot with Amy and Child Neurology. We did strategic planning together, so she'll be able to talk about it from her perspective, and I'll be there as well. So that's following this session. So we won't get too into the weeds here, but you can join us then if you'd like to get into more details. So that's our lineup. So why even do strategic planning? Why is it a worthwhile exercise? And it's really what I would say is about alignment in making sure that your priorities are documented and shared. Meaning, it's incredible how many times I see a group of committed volunteer leaders of an organization come together and think they're on the same page around priorities, but in fact not have the same priorities. They're related, but they see them actually differently. So this is an exercise that in part gets people on the same page. I will say that takes on heightened importance when you have a cause-related organization and people are really passionate. And so they tend to be passionate through their lens, which no begrudging that, but it's not necessarily always got people on the same page. Resources and getting those aligned to support those priorities, and then making sure that there's some boundaries and some continuity. There's so many directions our organizations could take. And you've got to go through a planning process to say, we've got only so much bandwidth. So what priorities are we going to set? What kind of work will we be engaged in? Are we going to work at the federal level, or are we going to work at the state level? Are we going to be patient-focused, or are we going to be policy or legislation-focused? Are we going to be, there's so many possibilities. You got to get those priorities set. So all these are good reasons to get engaged in strategic planning. We're going to save overall questions till the end, but if I say something along the way that doesn't make sense, I'll take clarifying questions because I don't want you to be unclear or off track for where I'm going. So here's a question I get all the time. Why are we doing a strategic plan? Is this for the website? Is this for our brochure? Is this for our tagline or other marketing materials? No. First and foremost, strategic planning should be for a tool for the board to lead the organization, a roadmap, if you will. I said I was going to use that word. This needs to be the thing that keeps the organization leaders focused around the shared priorities, and that it drives every agenda for every meeting, the conversations you have, and when you say no, because you will have really cool, good possibilities that will come your way. You could do this, or you could start a new program, or you could talk to this new funder. And then you need to check with the plan to say, is this what we said we wanted to do? Because otherwise you can spin off in lots of directions and end up losing sort of your firepower, if you will. So first and foremost, build a plan that's going to help the board. And over time, your board will evolve, but your plan ought to be that source of continuity that keeps the board focused on the priorities that matter. The plan will evolve too over time, but it should be that sort of North Star that keeps things going forward. So that's why you do planning. And then it can and should inform communication messages. So it should inform the website. It should inform the things you say to funders. But start with it as a tool for the board. Okay? Okay. The other metaphor, and it's sort of roadmap, but slightly different. Your job when you're creating a strategic plan is to steer, not row. And by that I mean strategic planning is about saying, we're going to go over there. We're going to go raise $10 million. We're going to go make a difference in the lives of parents with the direction you want to go. It's not at this point, and this can be hard, particularly when you're small, it's not about how you will get there. That's the rowing. That's a different set of tasks. So how you will raise that $10 million is not in the strategic plan. That you want to raise $10 million, and I'm just throwing numbers out. I'm sure many of you would love to have a $10 million gift, right? But it's that you want to do that, or that you want to engage families in a different country, or whatever it might be. That is a really important point. It's about steering, not rowing. The rowing matters. And all of you, I'm sure, have gotten into positions of leadership because you've been a great doer. And that has to still happen, but that's not what this exercise is about. So, how do you actually build one? How do you pull it together? And I'm going to talk a little bit about what usually happens is that there's a bunch of people, volunteers and committees, who have ideas, and the organization just starts running around doing things. That's probably I'm seeing some nodding heads. That's a familiar pattern for many of you. So it doesn't have any structure that holds it together or focus. So you just get all kinds of activity going on. What should happen is that there are ideas, you pull them together in a planning process, also in a budgeting process. What can you afford to do? What makes economic sense? And what can you do from an operations level? What person power do you have? Oftentimes I talk about time, talent, and treasure. So you need to assess time, talent, and treasure. So those are the sort of filters, that planning process, and those that your bandwidth. That then creates a plan that has more cohesive and focused actions, so that you're rowing and getting things done in a cohesive way. So that's just broadly what should happen along the way. Here are some questions that it's really helpful for leaders to be thinking about, sort of getting your mind primed for strategic planning going into the exercise. And I know the font is a little small when you get to the back, but just asking, what doesn't fit? What doesn't make sense about what we're doing? What would somebody who wasn't long affiliated or in the know with our organization, what would that person do? And I won't read all these to you, but you need to take these kinds of questions and really ponder or see things differently. I'll ask you to do a little exercise with me. If you will point your index finger at the ceiling. Just point it, hold it up high, point your finger at the ceiling, play along if you're remote, and start moving your finger in a clockwise direction. So 12 to 3 to 9. Clockwise, clockwise, clockwise. Keep going clockwise and begin to lower your finger down. Clockwise, 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 counterclockwise. What's going on there? Some of you are like, what? It didn't. Clockwise, 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 counterclockwise. There are people who are still trying to figure this out. What's going on here? You change perspective. When I see it from here, there's one set of truths. When I see it from here, it's the same action. The truth is different. That's kind of what these questions are trying to get at, is to how would you see your organization with some fresh or different eyes? There's different truths. Okay, how do you consider those in a planning process that leads to greater outcomes or for the greater good of things? That's a good party trick. You can always take that around if you really want to mess with people's heads after they've had a glass of wine or two. Okay, so good questions to ask along the way. Here are really critical success factors to think about in strategic planning. We do have room if you want to filter in. We'll make room for you in the seats here. Again, small, you can get these slides from me, but you're going to hear me talk about data in more detail in a second. We've really got to ground this in data, and don't be overwhelmed or intimidated by the thought of, I don't have data or I don't have money to get data. We will talk about that. It's much more approachable than you might think. It's about why before we get to the how, why we exist and where we're trying to go. And along the way, you're going to have this middle point here around making some hard choices. I cannot emphasize enough. You're going to have to make hard choices. This is, in many instances, why people abandon or don't engage in strategic planning, because you can't do everything. And that's so hard to accept. But if you make choices and you focus yourself and your resources, you can get some wins. And maybe with some strength, some added might or impact or relevancy, whatever it is you need, then maybe you can come back and revisit some of these things and say, okay, we've got more bandwidth now, we can take something on. But that making choices, wow, is that hard. It just is. So we'll talk more about that. So the other thing I want you to think about are what are some assumptions that you would put into place. This is just a sample of one organization. But there's just a few basic things you need to think about as you go into this. What's our planning horizon? Are we talking about 2 years or 10 years? I will tell you that the 10 years doesn't make a lot of sense to me because the world changes too quickly. I mean, think about healthcare. My goodness, how quickly that changes and doesn't change in some ways. But so we need to talk about what's the right time horizon for your group. Many times these plans are between 3 and 5 years. And my experience in recent years is that it's trending more towards 3-year plans than 5-year plans. Again, because the pace of economic change, political change, all sorts of things are changing so quickly, groups feel like we can't get too far out because we just don't know what the landscape will bring. But that planning horizon is one of the assumptions you ought to set. You know, this group, ABC, this is a real list, but I just made it a random name. They wanted to be clear, we're not broken. We're not doing planning because we're falling apart. We're doing planning because we want to be, 2.0. We want to be stronger. But sometimes when you're in planning, it's like, no, we're like off the rails. We're in trouble. And if we don't turn it around, if we don't get some funding in the next 90 days, we're going to be out of business. So, there's different realities for your organization. You just need to think about what yours need to be and pull it together, some sort of set of assumptions along the way. Does that make sense? Okay. You can begin to imagine what your list might look like. So now into the structure itself. One more thing I forgot. This mantra is one that I raise. I didn't create it, but I use it all the time. Organizational culture eats strategy for breakfast. Organizations have cultures. They have ways of operating. Some are, and there's no right or wrong to the culture. Some are more effective than others, but your culture of your entity is what it is. If you create a plan that betrays the culture of your organization, the culture will win. It will derail your plan. And so you got to think, if you're a really collaborative, participative organization, if all voices matter and you really make decisions very publicly or in very dispersed ways, if you create a plan that has centralized decision making and has predetermined how things are going to happen, you will have a revolt on your hands. There's lots of different ways this plays out. If I took an example from the headlines, and I don't want to get into politics here, but if you are of a certain age, you will remember there was a point in time when Carly Fiorina was the CEO of Hewlett-Packard. And Hewlett-Packard was renowned for its garage culture. They started in a garage at Hewlett-Packard, and it was that very sort of bootstraps kind of thing. She ditched it and went a different route, and it didn't work for her. And there are other examples we could point to, but that culture will win. So you just got to think about what is our culture and how do we work with it as opposed to against it. Sometimes that's hard for insiders to see. the culture, but you can get people to help you figure out what it is. Okay, now the model. I'm going to talk about these 5 steps. I'm just going to do a time check here. And we'll go through them one by one with a little more detail on some than others. But first I want to start with the data-driven decision making and really getting a lay of the land. What we're talking about here is saying, what's the environment internally and externally in which your organization is operating? Because we need to make sure that we have an accurate picture of what's happening inside and outside that is influencing who you are and where you need to go. So getting things like organizational trends. What's your funding line look like? Have you been growing your sources of revenue? Are you flat? Are you declining? What's going on with, if you have meetings that you hold and other people attend, or other sorts of programs that you offer that people engage in? Or is it growing, expanding, shrinking? What's going on? Members, or in some instances, constituents or supporters, what are their views? What are their needs? What's going on for them? Staff, if you have staff, what are their views on the issues going forward? Industry or issue-related trends, what's going on in that space? To the extent that there are competitors, are there, in some cases, drug companies or other funders who are doing some things in your space? And competitor doesn't have to be in a negative connotation. It's other people doing things in your territory. We need to have a handle on what they're up to. All this could be gathered with no money required. Takes some time, and that's valuable. But you don't have to spend big money to pull these things together and say, let's get an accurate read to the best that we can, probably more qualitative than quantitative, but we can pull together some insights here. Maybe you can get some data that either others have been able to pull together, or maybe you've got some money, maybe a funder would be willing to sponsor gathering some research for you as a part of an initiative. But whatever you do, don't go into the process where it's going to only rely on personal experiences from the people in the room, which is what will happen if you don't have some kind of data to ground the conversation. So this is, again, where the personal advocacy and passion can get in your way if you don't watch it. So you don't have to break the bank. You can pull together some insights like this and at least say, right, what do we see here? What are the insights here? And you can do a SWOT analysis, which may be a term that you've heard before, but strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Oftentimes we talk about the strengths and the weaknesses as more inside the organization. So if you think about, a strength is that we've got really passionate advocates in every state. A weakness is that, our funding is a little precarious right now. The opportunities and threats tend to be more external. What's going on outside of your organization? So we're not going to do one right now, but that simple exercise is, again, a way to collect some insights that gets a little beyond personal anecdotal stories. Here are some really good questions to ask. They're maybe instead of a SWOT, because some of them get at similar things, but it's just a different way to get in the conversation. One of my favorites on this list is, what's the simplest thing we could do that would have the greatest positive impact? I mean, sometimes the answer isn't what's big and hairy and complicated. What's a simple thing we could do that would make a difference for us? And get a win, get some momentum under your feet. So, questions like that. A powerful question that what are we willing to get wrong? Because sometimes what you need to do is innovate. And innovation doesn't always equal success. You've got to be able to test some things and know, we might put a lot of time and money in this and it might not work for us. And so sometimes you're in a place where you can take a risk like that, and sometimes you're not. So thinking about what are we willing to get wrong is another good question going into this. So some good questions to play with. Here's too many words on a slide, I know. But this is an interesting twist on the way many of us come into strategic planning. And the gist of what Jeff Bezos says in this Harvard Business Review interview about how Amazon does strategic planning is they don't plan around what's changing. They plan around what's going to stay the same. So they plan around people want a quality product at a fair price with good service. And that they feel like they can get traction around. It might come in a drone, it might come in a truck, it might come in a Whole Foods store, it might, there's lots of different ways, but that sort of core is what they think they can plan around. And so I just think it's healthy to say, the takeaway from that whole long quote is, what's not going to change relative to our association? What's not going to go away? And what would we plan around if that were our focus? So in that sort of spirit of the twirling finger and looking at something from a different perspective, this is a different way to get into a planning conversation. Make sense? Good. Making sure you're still with me. The outcome of all this data collection and all this thinking about issues from different angles should be a set of what we call positioning statements. It's the so what. We've looked at all our trend data. We've looked at our competitor analysis. We've looked at our staff opinions. We've looked at our funder thoughts and feedback. So what's it mean for us? And so you would come out with a handful, not 20, but probably not one either. So what's at play that's relevant to us, and what should we do about it? And it can be really powerful to come up with a handful of those as fuel that drive you into the next stage of strategic planning. Because this is going to say what you need to do based on the data and the intelligence that you've gathered in this first phase. So it can be tricky to figure out some of those, but really powerful when you do it right. So that's our data collection piece. Now I want to talk about mission, vision, and values and what we need to do there. This is really the strategic foundation for your organization. And lots of people use these terms in different ways. So I just want to acknowledge that. I am not going to debate what's the right definition of mission versus vision. That's how I'm going to talk about it. We could spend a whole session debating, and other consultants or other situations might have said different things to you. But mission is what you do. It is not a tagline. It does not need to be sexy, inspiring language. This is what our organization does. If you do advocacy, it's in your mission. If you do patient education, it's in your mission. If you don't do networking or family support, it's not in your mission. So it's just simply what we do and for whom we do it. The vision's where you get the inspiring stuff. That ought to make your tummy tickle a little bit. It is because of our existence, because of the work we do, this is the impact on the world. If you look at history, probably the most famous vision statement is Dr. Martin Luther King standing on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial talking about his dream. That was a vision. It wasn't called that, but that was painting a picture of a reality in the future that he might never see, but that is the world that he wants to create. What is the world you want to create with your organizations? What's it look like? That's vision. And then the values are the core beliefs that you hold that drive what you do and don't do. As human beings, we hold values, and our different organizations have values too. So let me unpack those just very quickly. So mission. I'll just show you some examples from very different kinds of organizations. So you may giggle a little bit. Standards, education, and advocacy. This is iBank Association, corneal transplants. So it's all about that arena. So somewhat related to a medical setting that you might engage with. As I said, there's nothing inspiring about that, but it's clear. That's what they do. Financial advisors. Again, not super inspiring, but clarity. This is what we do. And we're going to promote the effectiveness of a certain kind of financial advisor, those who don't work on commission, but they work on fees. There's an association for everything. I'm going to wow you in a minute with that. Concrete Association. They don't do education. They make decisions. This association literally makes decisions that cause this building to stand. They set standards through consensus decision making that drive building codes globally. And how bridges and tunnels and buildings and all those things, that's what they do. They don't lobby, they don't network, they do that. And in a much lighter note, tennis players, getting people to play tennis around the world. So very different kinds of missions, but just intended to say this is what we do. What would your mission statement be? And that's a rhetorical question at this point, but what do you do? And is that as clear to all of your stakeholders as it is to you? Because that's what strategic planning can help make happen. So vision, very quickly. This is that more inspirational stuff. One way of getting at it is say, if we looked off into the 2030 or 2040, way down the line, what would we want the newspaper headline to be? A positive newspaper headline to be about our organization. What would be the thing that would like, that's cool. That got us on the front page of the New York Times in a really good way. What would you like that story to be? That can help you sometimes get into a vision state of mind. So some examples. This is literally the Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators, not a group of people who are typically well thought of, right? It's the DMV where you go stand in line for a long time. Although they would suggest that's not the case. They have all the stats to say lines are short now. But because of the work of DMVs, we have safe drivers, we have secure identities, we have lives saved because of the work that they do. So, who knew? Who thought about that part when you're standing in line? But that's the impact they want to make with their organization. This is the Association of State and Territorial AIDS Directors. So all the U.S. states and territories have some public health official who has a portfolio of HIV and AIDS. And so that's a dream, that's a big aspiration, but that's the impact they're looking to make. Back to our concrete friends, might make your tummy tickle less, but for them, they really get excited about a world that knows how to effectively use concrete. And so that's the impact they're looking to make. And this is a criminal justice reform organization where they're looking to reform the way courts operate. So, again, they're not usually long, not super wordy, but they ought to get some traction for you in terms of, wow, that would be cool. This is a real example. This is the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And I want to show you what a mission and a vision sitting side by side look like. And so, the CDC, as hard as they work, is never going to get to healthy people in a healthy world completely. But boy, that's a nice dream, right? And so that's the vision that they hold while they promote health and quality of life in other ways. Okay? Quick quote from Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great and co-authored Built to Last, a business book that is very well known. The point here is about not just having vision and mission, but aligning with it. And this is a really key thing. Sometimes folks go through a strategic planning exercise and then don't live it. They don't actually implement it. And to live it, to implement it, means you've got to align. So you're not just writing the right words on the page, you're writing words by which you will live. There's a book by a guy named David Meister a few years ago called, best titled book that I've heard in a long time, Strategy and the Fat Smoker. His publisher didn't do a good job of promoting it, but the point that he makes is when you do strategic planning, capture things that you will do, not things that you think you ought to do. So it's pretty easy intellectually to say, I shouldn't eat that chocolate brownie, or I shouldn't smoke that cigarette. People have the knowledge to why those are not in their interest. But behaviorally, they don't follow the knowledge they have about why it's not in their interest. They do what they do. When you're going to create a plan, you build a plan that your organization will actually live by and will follow through on, not what sounds good. Do what you need to do and will do. So that's part of what Collins is talking about. Core values, I will talk about this quickly. Frankly, this can be a huge time suck in strategic planning. Taking the time to get on the same page with a bunch of passionate people about these are the values of our organization. Because look, there's a lot of worthwhile values in the world. But you can't have core values that are 25 long on a page. That's not core. That's a laundry list of values, all of which are great. But to get to the point where you say, no, these really are the core things we hold, can be tough. It can be powerful if you get there, but it can be tough. This is the String Teachers Association, so the people who teach publicly and privately how to play string instruments. And those are their core values. And that's the right set for them. It took them a long time to get to that set. You got to think about what yours would be. So I'm going to fast track that for a second. I want to talk about step 3 there, identify ongoing work. One of the problems that happens if we're not careful is we'll create a strategic plan that is really powerful and really big and forgets all the day-to-day things that still have to happen. You still have to manage your money. You still have to have a database. You still have to have a website. You still have to have meetings. And those don't rise to the level of strategic priorities. They might have some business processes involved, but they're about just ongoing operations that will continue to take the bulk of your time and the bulk of your money. Let's capture those and create a list. And here's just a sample list of what it might look like for one organization. What's your list of ongoing work? Important? Yes. Global Genes, this meeting, I'll just go out on a limb and say, this is not something that would show up on the strategic plan. It's really important. It takes a ton of work. It's a big budget item. But it's a successful meeting. We don't need to reinvent it from the ground up. We don't need to start over. It's not something that's going to take massive time, talent, and treasure. It matters, but it's not going to be a strategic priority. And I just made that up. You've probably got some things like that too. What's your list of ongoing work? Okay, part of this is also, what are we going to start doing, keep doing, stop doing? The hardest thing I find for boards to do is stop doing. Nobody wants to let go. We've done it. We've always done it this way. It's the thing that George started 12 years ago. We have to do this. You can't, in most cases, you can't do new things if you don't give up some existing or old things. Really hard. I'm not dismissing the difficulty there, but you got to get to the point where you let go of some things. That goes back to the tough decision making. You got to be willing to do some of that. Okay. Fourth thing, This is the core of strategic planning, will be most familiar to most people, where we get to what I call drivers, initiatives, and outcomes. This is another one where the language will be different. Some people will call these goals. Some people will call these objectives. Some people will call these whatever. We're not going to debate. It's how this plan gets more granular, from big ideas to more specific things. So for me, the drivers are broad categories on which we're going to focus. Within those broad categories, there's some things that we want to work on. And within those things we want to work on, there's some measurable outcomes we need to produce. So the easiest example that I often talk about with strategic drivers, pretend for a minute, whatever your model is, that you're a membership organization and you want to have members supporting your entity. So we might say a driver is membership. Broad category, not measurable at that level. And then we might say, okay, within membership, we want to have two initiatives. We want to have more engagement with our current members. So those people who are already with us, but we want them more active, more involved, larger donors, more engaged. That's one initiative. Still not super measurable. And the second initiative is we want more members. We want 25% more people in our organization than we already have. So we got two initiatives under the broad category of membership. And then we get to outcomes, which is we want 100 people more engaged than we have now, and there are ways we can measure engagement. And I can show you, I think I'm going to have an example here in a second. I don't. I'll come to it later. You get to that third initiative level or outcomes level, that's where you set outcomes, not activity. So if you want 100 new members, your strategic plan is not going to tell you how you're going to get those 100 new members. It's going to tell you that you want 100 new members. And then the worker bee, whether that's staff or whether that's you in your volunteer role, in the tactical work, you'll figure out how you get them. Is it, an email campaign or a phone-a-thon or whatever you're going to do? That's how you get it. That's a different exercise. So that's why that Hold 3 membership campaigns, that's tactical. That is not in your strategic plan. But increased by 650 is. Okay. You also got to think about your bandwidth, and funding, staffing, and what you're going to stop doing are all bandwidth pieces that you got to think about along the way. I'm going to keep driving because I want you to ask questions. Here's what a plan might look like. I know you can't read the small print from back there, unless you have really strong eyes, which I don't. But here's what this is. This is a one-page snapshot that tells you, your board, your members, funders, on one page, this is what we are all about. This is what we care about. This is the work we're doing, and this is the work we're going to try to do in the strategic drivers. Imagine how cool it would be if you had a one-page, powerful statement of this is what we're all about. What funder wouldn't love to sit and see that and talk that through with you? What member wouldn't, or donor or parent wouldn't love to sit and know what you're all about? Now, this is still high level, and there's a second page, which, whoops, I went the wrong direction. There's a second page that, this is what I was referring to earlier, that's got more of the details, and this is where it's more of a tool for the board to work from. But the combination of that and that is some good stuff, and that is a strategic plan. That's what you get out of this process. So, barreling right along in the interest of time. Whoops. The last thing that I want to talk about is evaluate and evolve. So you got to measure your performance. As a board, if you don't set a way to measure your work against the plan, you will never see results. This gets skipped all the time because it can be hard. It can be hard. What we oftentimes talk about oops, keep going the wrong direction. No, I'm sorry, I did go the right direction. The very bottom line here, which you probably can't see, is what we call key performance indicators. And these are a couple variables that we often call them meta indicators. So cash flow, there's a lot of things that go into creating your financial performance. But on a meta level, how you doing organizationally? That's a great thing to track, right? But money is not everything. So net promoter score, some of you may have heard that, and it's a common term in the business world. It's basically looking at satisfaction. And the core question is, would you recommend this organization to a friend? Would you recommend this product to a friend? So lots of corporate entities use NPS, Net Promoter Score. You can do that at the individual level. You can go and Google it. There's all kinds of resources around Net Promoter Score. How are people feeling about you? That's what Net Promoter gets. And brand recognition, and that can be complicated. These are not necessarily your KPIs, but you can come up with just a handful that say, how's this organization doing? That's great insight to sort of track performance, while you also have this granularity, and you got to track that too. So, last thing I want to talk about, sorry for flipping around on you. Oh, the last thing I wanted to talk about on this is evolve. Your plan, we talked about a 3-year planning horizon, but don't pretend that that plan has to be cast in stone over the course of those 3 years. When market forces change, when you get that $10 million grant that you hoped for in year 2 of your plan, replan, because you got a lot more to play with now. So evolve the plan as things change over time. That's okay. The metaphor we sometimes use, I know I've used a lot of metaphors today, is sometimes you need to remodel and sometimes you need to redecorate. So from time to time, remodel. Big change to your plan, or deep, like let's start over and really think this through and build something new. But on a regular basis, at least annually, look at where you need to redecorate a little bit, where some new throw pillows need to come into the equation and some curtains that are just going to change it a little bit, keep it fresh, and feeling good about it. So that's that evolve piece. Who needs to be at the table? Who needs to be there with you? Here's my list. Ideally, your board of directors. Because if I was here as an attorney talking about fiduciary responsibility, one of the most fundamental responsibilities of the board is to set direction, is to set strategy. So ideally, it's your board. But there's different reasons sometimes why the board is not the right answer. Ultimately, it's going to end up with the board because they drive the organization. So a task force of 8 to 10 people. Not to overuse Jeff Bezos, but he has a 2-pizza rule. He doesn't think any meeting should have more people in it than you can feed with 2 pizzas. And I agree with him from the standpoint of direction and getting decisions made. If you start getting more than sort of 8 to 10, it can be very hard to get decision making to happen. So that's in the ideal. If you're putting together a task force, who are your most strategic thinkers? Because as much as George is a great doer, and he has been loyal and dedicated, George is not a strategic thinker. Or Irma, Irma's a bad name to use now. Sorry. Whoever. So you got to be able to say, who are our sharpest minds for strategy? And then pull the implementation minds in for the different conversation. And senior staff, if you have staff, selectively, meaning staff should not drive the content of the plan. But boy, should staff be at the table, because who knows the issues better than them? Because they live it day in and day out. So the staff should be in there to help inform the volunteer leaders who are crafting the plan themselves, but not in a way that leaves the volunteer leaders feeling like the staff are controlling the process. And that's a fine line you got to walk. What do you do? Talk with your leadership about this. Like literally go back and talk to your peers about, we need to do some strategic planning. and I got some resources out of the conference. Self-serving, you don't have to pay for a consultant. I would strongly encourage you to find somebody, whether it's a volunteer person who maybe isn't super involved in your organization, or a friend you know who does this kind of work, or a community leader that you trust. You need to be in the conversation. And if you're running the process, you're not in the conversation in the same way. So yes, there are consultants like me. If that makes sense for your organization, great. But somehow or other, find somebody who can help you facilitate the process. You'll get more out of it. Gather data, I said that earlier, and just start the conversation. Even if you're not ready to do it now, get the conversation going. So those would be my to-do list items. A couple resources: the American Society of Association Executives, ASAE. So it's the Association of Associations. I know. And of course it's in Washington, D.C., because that's where you would have that. But they have some really good samples and resources there. BoardSource is the association for nonprofit boards of directors. If you don't know about BoardSource, you got to check them out, because they have all kinds of great stuff for volunteer leaders of boards of directors. So two really good places to go and look for things. Questions? Do you have any questions? I've got a few minutes. The hands go up. Christian's got the microphone, and we'll fire away.
The workshop that you're doing next, is it similar to what you just gave? Or is it different?
It's different in that we're going to talk about real examples, and we're going to ask you to do a little work to say, okay, what is my mission? Do I know it now? And Amy, who's in the back of the room from Child Neurology Foundation, is going to be with me, and she's going to be able to talk about, this is what it was really like for us, and this is where we ran into a wall, and so it's going to be more implementation.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Can you send us your slides?
Yeah. I just need your business card.
Sure.
Or write it down somehow, and we'll send you the slides, for sure. They're on the app already. Thank you. Up here.
Hi, I'm Kristen Smedley with the Curing Retinal Blindness Foundation. So I know this is kind of a hard one to answer, but ballpark, how long are we talking when you start sitting the board down to say we're going to go about it this way, and when it really comes to fruition that they agree and come up with that plan?
You can do as little as 24 hours in face-to-face meeting with at least, I'll say 45 days of planning on either side of that. So that 91 days, I think, if I do my math there. Give it enough time to really reflect and process. You don't want to make snap decisions. This does not need to take a year. It does not need to cost $100,000. It can. There are organizations that do that. There might be some political reasons why you want a slower process, or you want a more expensive process if you need certain voices, but it doesn't have to be. It can be pretty concise and I think manageable. Does that?
Yeah, and then my second one is, would you say that you pretty much go majority rules? Because, you know, we've got that whole, are we really going to focus on education when we really want to? You go with majority?
I didn't talk about it. I thought about putting it in here. I have come to the point where I ask the group at the beginning to say, what is our decision-making process going to be here? It may be the same as you do in your board meetings, where, you know, some boards it's majority rules, some boards it's consensus. What I say in this process is we have to have consensus with a threshold. If you go with consensus, it can't be unanimous, or we'll never get there. So you can say, you know, at least 2/3 of us need to feel like we can live with this answer. It might not be my favorite. And so even if you've got some people who say, heck no, I don't like this, you can go forward. So make it clear on the front end what your decision-making process will be, and then stick with it. Yeah. Back here, maybe hard to get to you. If you just say it, I'll repeat it. So. Yeah. So the question was, what is my experience working with medical professionals in strategic planning? Because if we had 2 pizzas, they'd spend forever debating what the toppings were going to be on the pizzas. Physicians in particular, no offense if they're here, can be tricky because they used to knowing and being in charge. The more clear the process is and that people can understand it, usually the better. Definitely a reason to get an external facilitator, because it's amazing what physicians, it's not only physicians, what groups will, instruction and boundaries they'll take from me as an external person that they won't take either from their peer or from their staff. So the more you can have an outside voice to help corral some of that. And the other thing is to do TikTok and literally say, if we stay in this room all day and all night, you're going to be miserable. So let's get on with it. It's pepperoni and cheese, out, kind of thing. And so that can be tricky. This has to be the last question. So the question was, would you include spokespeople who are well known, who have to be comfortable with the message? Maybe. To the extent that they can contribute to the dialogue, great. You definitely want to make sure you socialize this, even if they're not in the process, with key stakeholders, funders, spokespeople, other key voices, to make sure that they are with you as opposed to against you when you come out of this. So that was a quick answer. I have to wrap up. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it. Give me your card if you would like the slides, but they're on the app.
Thank you, John, for sharing your knowledge of strategic planning and why it's important for nonprofit to properly develop theirs. At this time, we would ask that you go onto the mobile app and take a brief survey of this session, and then go ahead and transition to your next one. But can we get one more last round of applause for John, please?